Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Mike Dane with MLS Technology. Today, we're going to be discussing the transaction desk system. And I'm not getting my audio feedback showing that I am actually speaking. If you guys wouldn't mind, just could you post in chat that you're hearing me all right? Uh-oh. Oh, okay, good. All right, I appreciate it. Sorry, Zoom is giving me an unusual error message about my speaker not working, and I'm like, I don't need my speaker to work right now. Anyway, good morning, everyone. So before we get started with the course content, I did actually want to run through just a couple basic things. So all of you guys are going to be starting on mute by default. There is a Q&A section down there at the very bottom of the screen. This is where you guys can post any of your questions that you may have, everything else. The chat is actually going to be the best place for you guys to post any commentary, examples, if you guys have any stories that you want to share, so on and so forth. Now, the session is going to be recorded. We'll have a link sent to the recording after class is over. And I also wanted to point out if you guys have any audio or video issues to immediately let me know, chat, Q&A, whatever the case may be. Always make sure that if you guys are having problems, you got disconnected, whatever, that we are made aware as quickly as possible, especially since this is a CE credit class. We don't want anybody to miss out on the credit just because you're having some kind of technical issue. But speaking of the CE credit, as soon as class is over today, we're going to be sending the attendance report out to our education director, Tiffany Valines. She'll get that sent over to OREC today, and hopefully that should be applied before tomorrow. But that's about it. Let's run through the buttons down there at the bottom of the screen. So again, chat is going to be where you guys can post any commentary, examples, etc. Any questions that you may have, though, please make sure that you post those under the Q&A section. Because the question and answer section does actually give me a little bit more of a notice whenever somebody posts something. So if you guys have something that you would like to ask, make sure you put it there. There's also a raise hand button. I do see that we have somebody that's raised their hand already, but if you guys would like to ask a question with your voice during the course, hit that raise hand option. That's just going to let me know that you would like to get unmuted. Oh, and you can't see the screen. Is it not sharing? Maybe just to make sure, is everybody able to see the screen? It should have that participating on computer option up at the top there. Oh, okay. Claudia, it may be a good idea to leave the session that you're in and then click on that click to join link in that email again, just to make sure. It's been a while since we've had some technical issues, so I'm glad we're at least getting this worked out before we get into the meat of the content. But all right. And then we also have, for those of you guys who are joining us on mobile devices, buttons are still going to be there. You just need to tap the screen in order to see them. But that should be about it. If you guys do end up having any problems, questions, anything like that, give us a call over at the service desk and we can help out. In fact, I may have somebody reach out to Claudia just to make sure she's able to get back in again, but she's back. All right, Claudia, hopefully you can see the screen now. And we're going to go ahead and looks like it's 9:05. So we're going to launch our poll and we'll get officially started. So the poll is fairly simple. This is going to be a required element for the CE credit. So I will need everyone to participate in the poll. If you don't see the poll or if it's not allowing you to participate in it, please let me know in the chat or the Q&A. I just want to make sure that everybody gets the credit that they deserve for this class. And also, if we do the interactive elements like this, then we don't have to require the cameras to be turned on, which is also something I would prefer to avoid. I imagine you guys are happy with that as well. All right, we only have a couple more people to answer that poll, and then we can go ahead and move on. I'm going to give you guys another 30 seconds. So again, if you see that the poll is up, go ahead and answer that real quick, and then we'll get started with the course. Oh, down to our last two people. I do see that we have one person who's running a duplicate session. I think we should be set then. Okay. I think we should be good. So just so you guys can see this real quick before we get started. It looks like actually, oh, it's an almost even split. We got half new people, or at least relatively new people, and then half of you guys are veterans. And it looks like half of you guys are using Transaction Desk, another half of you guys are using .loop. We got Zipform, DocuSign, and someone who's not using any system yet. So actually this is good. We'll get you a good introduction. The good news about the class that we're presenting today is that we're actually going to be teaching this from the perspective of just anybody that's going to have access to the system. There are some options that we'll be discussing along the way that are going to be a little bit unique to the brokers and people who, brokers, and also some features that are unique to people that have add edit permissions. But everything else that we're going to be discussing is going to be universal. And I'm also going to try and give you guys some context to the reason for doing any of the parts and pieces that we're discussing today. So, all right, let's get started. So the transaction desk system is actually a form filling and digital signing system. So what this is going to provide us the ability to do is take any of the forms that either GTAR has, your local association has, or even just going to the generic forms that are available through OREC, adding those into effectively a folder, which we call a transaction, getting them filled out with some information that's either automatically filled in or things that'll need to be manually added, and then getting those sent off to be signed. So our perspective that we're going to be viewing this from today is that we're going to be putting together the listing agreement. So this is going to be the initial few steps. So before we even have a listing put into the system, but all that's going to be a little bit more on the practical side of things. So I wanted to get us started with our home page and how to actually get into Transaction Desk. So when you first go to mlstechnology.com, which by the way is going to be directly into the MLS, I know that there's some people that are still going to tulsarealtors.com and then clicking on a link from there, or they may even have a favorite that goes directly into Matrix. But we strongly recommend that you guys actually move over to just doing mlstechnology.com, primarily because we actually are going to be setting up a web page that's specific just to us. So there's going to be a lot more features and functions on there in the near future. But in order to be able to see any of that, you're going to need to go to mlstechnology.com. Once you get signed in, you'll have access to all of our applications here. So we've got Matrix, Realist, Transaction Desk. So when you guys get signed into Matrix, there's going to be an easy link to be able to jump right into Transaction Desk on that home page. So we've got external links here, but we always recommend that people try and access it through here. So just when you're on your MLS portal, click on Transaction Desk, and it'll bring you to this home page. Now, the homepage that we see here is just a little bit different than what you may see when you sign in. I've actually gone through and done just a slight amount of customization to this. Primarily what we have on the screen is going to be a couple easy buttons, a couple of lists, and potentially even some information about any of the signings that you've sent off, so you can quickly and easily see whether or not someone has completed a signing or if it's in the process, so on and so forth. Now, customizing the homepage is very similar to the way that we can customize in Matrix, where you can click and drag things around. But if you guys have experienced this in Matrix, you may recognize this as a little bit of an issue. Whenever you sign in on a touchscreen device, in order to scroll up and down, you actually have to tap your finger and then click to drag it up and down. Well, clicking and dragging is literally how you can rearrange the screen on Matrix. So in order to prevent just accidentally moving everything around on your screen, Transaction Desk has actually put a padlock up at the top right corner. So if I wanted to make some adjustments to my screen in Transaction Desk, I'll click on this padlock to unlock the screen. You notice how this opens up a little tray. This is the additional buttons that I have not added to my screen quite yet. And then down below, all of our currently present widgets are all going to have a new texture on their little headers. And there's a little X to get rid of something. So let's say that we went back to effectively what the default option is. I'm going to take my transaction list shorter, make my Authentisign list shorter, and put in my forms, put in my checklists. There we go. So notice I'm just clicking and dragging to move those onto my screen. If I need to resize something, I'm going to put my cursor towards the edge of its bottom or right side and just make that a little bit longer, a little bit wider. There we go. I'm also going to add in a Create Templates button. So when I drop this, it just drops the button in place. And if there's anything on the screen that I don't want, so for instance, if this document upload button wasn't serving me the way I wanted it to, I can just hit that X to remove it. And you notice that now it actually has that button present up at the top here again. So let's do the same thing with templates. I hit the X, it shows back up. If I need to move something back down, click and drag. So I like having my screen just a little bit more simplistic. This way I see more of my transactions on the screen at the same time. And I'm also going to move my signings down. So this is the bread and butter of using this system, is actually seeing all of those digital signatures come through. Now, once I'm done with the customization on my homepage, just like we saw before, when I unlocked it, everything was available for modification. Once I'm done with that, click the lock again, and everything is locked back down. I can't click and drag anymore, can't accidentally move something out of place or close a window or anything like that. Now, since we're going to be doing this from a very practical perspective today, I'm going to be starting us off with just the absolute basics, just creating the initial transaction itself. Now, we'll be talking about navigation a little bit more later, but what I want to jump into is just creating the initial transaction. If you guys are watching this in the recording, I would very strongly recommend that you follow along. If you guys are doing this live right now with me, it may be best just to observe for now. If you guys can do both at the same time, it might be good to actually give it a try. But I'm going to hit this Create Transaction button. This is going to provide me with just one required field, name. So I have to give this transaction a name. There's a whole bunch of different ways to come up with a naming convention, or you can just put in whatever you're going to remember this transaction by. What I would very strongly recommend that you do is actually put in at least the name of the person that you're going to be working with, and then also the address of the property. Now, notice I didn't put in the complete address, so it doesn't say Tulsa, Oklahoma, blah, 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 blah. It's just going to give me just the basic information. Now, the logic behind this, at least for me, is just that this way I always know who it was that I was working with in regards to this transaction. But even if I only put their name, I'm still just going to be limiting myself to, well, if I work with this person again, then I need to know some more specificity. For instance, what the address was. So this is an easy way to kind of make sure that you don't accidentally make duplicates if you have the same named person or same person in another transaction. But then we also have the address, instead of it just being, an address with no context to who we were dealing with, we have a combination of both. But again, the transactions can be named whatever you like. That's just a personal recommendation on my part. Everything else that's added on to this little create transaction window is not something that's required. But let's run through it anyway, just to make sure you guys are familiar. The template page is going to show us the, template dropdown is going to show us the templates that we've created or anybody that's actually created templates in our office has made for everyone. So in my case, I see a property management listing packet and a residential listing packet. Now, the example that we're going to be working through today is going to be putting in a residential listing. So instead of actually starting with blank information and having to add a bunch of things in manually, I could literally just grab this residential listing packet and go from there. Now, later on in the class, we're going to be discussing how to create templates, because I can tell you the templates are going to save an immense amount of time for you. So I want to make sure that you guys are familiar with that. Since I want to just give us a general overview, I'm actually going to leave this blank for now. Now, the type, on the other hand, is something that I would recommend that you guys add. This is just going to give a little bit more clarity to, what property type you're working with, or whether this is a listing or if you're working on the sales side. But one of the cool things about this is whenever we choose our type, it's going to automatically change the add me as the to something that's going to be contextually accurate. So in this case, if I were to choose residential sale, it's going to automatically recognize, all right, I'm working on the sale side. So I'm working with my buyer, I am the selling agent. If I switch this instead over to what we're doing today, the residential listing, it's going to switch me over to listing agent. Now, there's a couple other places in the system that are going to just change things based on other options you've chosen. I'll point those out as we go through. There's also this import data option. This is where we can choose between either putting in an MLS number or directly importing data from Realist. Now, if we have an MLS number in hand from maybe a previous listing or whatever the case may be, you guys can enter that information in there. In my case, if I'm actually going to be importing from Realist, I'm going to have one extra field for me to choose. I have to choose which county it is that I'm working with. And then I have to put in the tax ID. Now, you can also run a little search within the system. So instead of having to worry about going and finding the tax parcel number, the APN, or the tax ID, or the account number, whatever it is that the county names it, there is also a tax search option, which allows us to just choose our county, put in some basic information about the property, and then run a search for it. It'll give you a couple options if you found more than one result, but it's a fairly simple search. So you guys don't have to come with that number in hand if you don't have it. Now, I'm going to leave mine on blank for now. Again, just like we're doing with the template, I want to show you guys what a completely empty transaction looks like so we can manually add all of that ourselves. It's also going to reinforce the value of creating those templates. Now, finally, we have the add me as the. This section is going to automatically choose something based on whatever type you have, but you also do have the option to switch over to neither. I know that there's some admins that'll be adding transactions for a bunch of people in their office. They don't necessarily need to add themselves. They want to add in a listing agent or a selling agent later. And then there's also the possibility that you guys might have gotten lucky. You got a buyer in hand already. You can just go ahead and add yourself as both the listing and selling agent. Now, the reason why this is important is going to be illustrated later, but just keep that in mind that right now I've been added as the listing agent. Now, we also have one last option on here, the use wizard. Just leave that checked. It's a default. It's going to save you guys a bunch of time. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to hit the create button up at the top here. And that's going to bring us into the wizard. Now, the reason why we recommend that you guys use that default option to use the wizard is because what it's going to do is actually start you on a 5-step path to ensure that you got everything that you need for this particular transaction. So in our case, it's starting us off on the details page. And from here, I can see we've got the transaction type. It's already automatically put to the residential listing, as we saw on that previous page. And then it has the transaction status defined. Now, the status is also going to be up here at the top, but just so you guys get a little perspective on this, it's currently going to be putting this status on transaction status open. Now, there are some other familiar options on here. We've got active, closed, expired, pending, withdrawn. This open status, though, is actually meant to indicate that we're in effectively a limbo state. So before we actually have a listing put in, before it's gone active, before it's actually gotten any paperwork signed to be pending, before it's gotten its closing paperwork done so it's not closed, and this isn't something that's completely out of our needs at the time. We've already gotten everything done with it. Paperwork's closed out. No more need to be able to see it. You can switch that over to closed file complete. But right now, since we don't have a listing number, we don't have anything active, we could just leave it in that open status and then come back to this transaction later to switch it to whatever its current status is. Now, the rest of the information is going to be fairly simple. There's one difference between how we would be filling the information out in Matrix versus Transaction Desk, and that's going to be on the street name section. Now, when we're looking at the street name in Matrix, the street name is actually going to be referring to just this 193rd. So the south before, the east after, and even the avenue is all going to be separate fields. We got a pre-direction, the post-direction, the street type. But when you're in Transaction Desk, it just wants you to dump all of the street name together into one field. I'm going to put in Tulsa. There we go. Got some basic stuff there. We'll do legal description just so you guys can see where that's going to show up. There we go. And we'll give it a year built. All right. Now, listing information. 123 $1 billion property. I got Elon Musk coming out to take a look at this property. Hopefully get to get a nice commission off that. All right, so we're all set on this page. There are a bunch of other options on here that you can set up, more details that you can put in. Again, since we're just running through this to show as an example, I'm going to skip a bunch of this stuff that's kind of superfluous for now. We'll just move on to the next option. Now remember, we're in the wizard at the moment. So we're moving from step 1 to step 2. Step 2 is a very simple one, just the transaction dates. I'm just going to put in a list date of today, expiration date of tomorrow. All right. So again, we're going to hit next. And it's important to note that there is another option down here at the very bottom, this save and exit option. So instead of hitting next to move to my next step, if I needed to just cut and run from this particular wizard and actually just dive into something else, or maybe I'm leaving the computer for a little while and I need to just save it and jump back into this transaction later, you can hit this save and exit button. It's important to note that what that does is it actually brings you to effectively an incomplete transaction. But if you guys do end up having to cut and run, save and exit, whatever the case may be, up at the top right corner, whenever you enter that transaction, there's going to be the wizard to just jump right back to wherever it was that you left off. So we had just finished the details, got our transaction dates put in, hit next again, and we're back to contacts. So just remember, whenever you guys see this save and exit option, it's to exit you out of the wizard and not to exit you out of the transaction or close out of transaction desk. It's just closing the information that you guys are working with in the wizard. Now on this contacts page, in step 3 of 5, over here on the right-hand side, there's a new add option. You'll notice that since we were added initially as the listing agent, I've actually already got my name in here. I'm signed in as the training agent account. And then I've also got my office information. So my broker's information will appear up here. So when I click on this add option, it's going to give me the choice between creating a new transaction contact, adding an existing contact. So we do have an address book so that while you are adding people to other transactions, you can start importing those into new transactions. If you guys, for instance, just have an investor that you guys are working with frequently, you can always end up just grabbing them from that previous transaction by doing add existing contact. Now, we also have one last option to add ourselves. But again, since we already had that done whenever we created the transaction, it's not necessary. And then we also have the add contact from Google. For those of you guys who have a Gmail account or an Android phone, you can typically import that information directly over from the contact you already have in your system. But since we're starting from scratch today, I'm just going to be doing create new transaction contact. So I'm going to add him with the required type. So in this case, the type is going to be seller. Now, when we switched over to seller, there's a little change that happened on the address page. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second here. So we've gotten them added as a seller. I'm going to put in Jeremiah Johnson. There we go. And we'll put in an email address for him. And in this case, Jeremiah and his spouse actually share an email address. For those of you guys who have been working in Dotloop, which I think was half the class at this point, you guys are going to end up noticing that there's a little bit of a difference between these two systems. Dotloop and Transaction Desk almost entirely work the same functionally. There's just going to be some features that one has that another doesn't. One of the big differences between the two is that you do have the option in Transaction Desk to have two contacts with the same exact email address. So if you guys end up with that couple that has the same email address, which I had always kind of been exposed to that when I was at ORU, because you'd have these people that had email addresses that were the same. They would have the same Instagram account. Everything was joint Facebook account, so on and so forth. I didn't even realize that that was something that, people that were a little bit more prolonged in the year will have as well. But then I found out my grandparents also had joint email address as well. So this is actually a lot more common than I think people realize. So when you guys do end up having a situation where you need to have two people that are signing with the same email address, Transaction Desk will allow you to do that. We also have a section here for legal name. Now, the legal name is a space that is a little bit more open-ended than it's implying here with legal name. If you have a representative of a company that's going to be participating in the transaction, and the company is going to be having this individual sign on their behalf, the legal name in this case could be the company name. And then they can just have their preferred signature be the official name of that individual. Now, there's also a section down here for preferred initials as well. So if we wanted to, we can ensure that they have that information in there in advance. You can also leave all of this stuff blank. And what's nice about this is that whenever we get to the signing process, it's just going to automatically assume that if these were not filled out, it's going to use first and last name for legal name. The preferred signature is just going to be first and last name, and the initials are going to be first and last initial. So it just automatically will change that stuff for you. Now, there's a checkbox down here at the bottom, add to address book. This is going to allow us to take the contact information that we have here and put it into the address book that we can then use on a different transaction later on down the line if need be. Oh, I see we've got a question. There it goes. And actually, Nicole, it should have an option there to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Bear with me for just a second here.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Now I can hear you. I'm so sorry. Could you repeat your question?
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
I can hear myself as well, so this will be awkward. But if I have a client that has an LLC, is that where that would go as well? And then just put their names at the top?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so and just as a heads up, each of the contacts will have to be one individual, but the legal name can be, if you have an LLC or a company or whatever the case may be, you guys can put that there.
And it would reflect the seller as the LLC name?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, since there's a question about it, I might as well just put that in there just so we can see how that appears on the paperwork. Yeah, I'll just leave that in there. All right. Now, when we initially got into create this contact, I switched over to the seller and mentioned that we were going to circle back around to this. whenever we put in that they were the seller on the address tab here, which some people fill out, other people might leave it blank. It's dependent on what kind of transaction you're running and whether or not you need to add something. But this same as property address option will allow us to just check the checkbox, and then all of the details will automatically be filled in, so that if you've already filled that out, so for instance, if this was a owner occupied residence and I'm just selling this property for this person, we can just check that checkbox and it takes the information that we've already filled out from elsewhere to put in. Now, if this were a buyer, on the other hand, you'll notice that it leaves the information in there because I checked that checkbox, but the checkbox itself is gone. So just another one of those contextual options where we can just say, all right, this is going to be the details. So I'm going to save the information for that. And notice that's going to be our seller name is Johnson & Johnson Construction, but as soon as I click on that, it shows me the individual. I'm going to add the other person. So in this case, this is going to be Jeremiah's spouse. And we'll put in the same email address and preferred initials. In this case, because they both have JJ as their first and last, I'm going to put in JJ. There we go. All right, so I'm going to move on to next. I've got my contacts put in. So we've got now our forms. Now the forms, it's going to start us off with just being empty. I did want to at least point out that whenever you guys get in here, if there's a template that you've used, you may have already added some forms with that template. Again, we're going to circle back around to discuss how to create the templates at the end of class, but I can't stress enough how much those templates will help you along the way. But for now, since I am working with no forms added, I'm just going to click this add button up at the top. And this brings us to a bunch of folders. Now, these folders are typically going to be things that are regionally specific. So we've got one for Ada, Bartlesville, we've got some for SOAR, we've got one for the Southern Oklahoma Board of Realtors, Texoma. These are mostly going to be forms that are specific to those areas, but you may notice that there's actually some duplicate forms that are also found in our general folders. So our commercial folder, the membership folder, MLS, property management, and residential. Now, since we're doing a residential listing today, I'm going to just click into the generic residential folder. So we're not going to be working with any of the regional ones. But even when I just go into this generic one, you can see that we have a ton of forms already in here. Now, the good news is the vast majority of these are going to automatically grab some of the data that I've already entered. So the address of the property, what the list price was, the expiration date, so on and so forth. All of that information will be put into the appropriate fields on the forms that might need them. Now, since this is a relatively long list, instead of having to scroll through here and try and find which one it was that I needed, I'm actually going to use this search function up at the top there. And Terry asked about contact information. Terry, not to worry, I'm going to leave your question open because we're going to address that in actually just a couple minutes here, but this is a good question. I appreciate it. So, but on the forms, if we want to try and find something, instead of having to scroll up and down, I'm just going to use the search to track it down. So for instance, in my case, I need the exclusive right to sell. So I'm going to type in exclusive. There we go. And this narrows my search. So now I've got a much shorter list. Looks like most of these are saying listing agreement or GTAR, OREC, etc. But whenever you guys are scrolling through the list of search results, it's important to note that each of those forms is going to indicate which folder it's actually contained within. So for instance, we see here in Ada, we've got the OREC listing agreement, exclusive right to sell. I've also got another one that's a little bit further down under, oh, here we go. OREC exclusive right to sell. And it's the same exact year revised and same month revised, but this time it's under the residential contracts and forms. Well, that's the one that I was hoping to find. So I'm going to check the checkbox for it. I see that my basket has increased. So I've got a number now. If I were to check a different one, I can see that that basket is increasing again. But whenever I clicked on this initial option, watch what happens to this one down here. So it's just automatically checking a different checkbox. And if I scroll back up, that one that I found in Ada, that was again an OREC version, also got checked. Now that doesn't mean that I have 3 different forms that I've added. Again, whenever I check this checkbox, my basket only increases by 1. So this is just effectively letting us know that this exact form is actually found in multiple different folders. So we don't have to worry about, oh, I've got too many checkboxes. Always just keep track of what your number is on your basket. Now, another good example that I like is the lead-based paint disclosure. So if I go into my residential contracts and forms, scroll back down here to the L section, and it looks like, oh, I don't have a lead-based paint disclosure. Now, for those of you guys who know the name of the form already, you might realize that that's not how it's actually written out. So if I type in just simply lead, it's going to keep track of everything else that's in the name as well. So I can see disclosure of lead-based paint, sales, that's the one that I need. Check the checkbox. And again, even though I checked one and it added one form to my basket, I also see that there's another checkbox down here, another checkbox up here. Again, that's just indicating that it's the exact same form in all of those folders. So enough about talking about the duplicates and folders. Let's now add in a blank addendum. There we go. Got my blank addendum. Check the checkbox. Basket is set to 3. If I need to double check my work, because again, at this point, I've gone through 3 different searches to try and find the forms that I was interested in, I can click on the basket and that'll show me all of the forms that I'm going to be adding in. So if I needed to get rid of something, I can hit that remove item. And then finally, we also have the property data form. And I'm going to be using the residential one. Now, the residential property data form we're going to be filling out at the end of class. I'm just going to be focused on trying to get the transaction started first, and then we'll talk about this data form. But my basket is full. I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and hit add. Now, when we click on add, it's going to add all of those forms to this forms section for the wizard, but it's also going to be available over here under forms. Now, the same thing is also going to be true. If you guys noticed, we've got contacts, which was step 3, and then the details, which was step 1 and 2. So once we're done with filling all of this information in, getting all of the details worked out, we can always go back to any of the details that we've created, add in any more contacts, or even update their contact information. And then we also have the ability to get back into the forms if we needed to fill any more out, or add in any more forms to fill out or send off to be signed, which is right here. Sorry about that. My allergies have been acting up, and I was in a car accident a couple weeks ago, and I sneezed so hard I just hurt my back again. All right. Okay, so we're done with our forms. We've added the ones that we need. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. This brings us to the final step of the wizard. Now, the documents section is actually going to seem like something that we've already discussed, but just to clarify the difference in the terminology here, transaction desk refers to documents as static pieces of information. So what we're referring to when we see the documents is going to be things that you guys have already filled out, potentially already had scanned in and signed. So if you guys have a PDF of, let's say, an appraiser document, or if you guys have the property condition disclosures filled out in person and scanned in, you can add that. It's just going to be a simple add process where you can upload that folder, upload that file directly from a location on your computer. Or if you guys wanted to email it in, there's even an email option where you can get a specific email address for this transaction. There's also an upload from DocBox if you guys have a previous transaction that had the documents in it, company forms, things like that. Or there's even an option to upload directly from Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or Box if you're using any of those service providers. Now, in my case, I'm just going to be adding in a little tax document. Go. All right. So we're all set there. So again, the forms that we were looking at were going to be filled out. This means that some of the details from the details page, some of the information from the contacts page will automatically be added onto those forms. We'll also have some additional spaces for us to fill out on the forms, whereas the documents, again, are just considered something that's already been completed or some static piece of information that you guys are needing to add. Now, that's not to say that we can't go back and actually make changes to this or even get it signed if we need to, which is actually what we're going to be doing in a bit here. It's just mentioning that the documents are, at least when they're initially added, something that's static. Now, I'm going to click on this Done option. Again, that's going to close us out of the wizard, and that brings us back to our transaction dashboard. Now, there's going to be a little pane here for the go to details, and you notice that's going to match the navigation that we have over here on the right. We have the exact same thing with forms where I can see all of my forms here, and then there's a go to forms option, again, matching this forms button over here. We have one for contacts, or excuse me, for documents, and then signings as well. And Terry asked earlier about how to get back in to make changes to the contact information. And actually part of the reason why I wanted to leave this question open is because this is actually something that we get questions about very frequently on the service desk side of things. So for instance, if you guys do end up adding in a contact when you're going through the wizard and either didn't add in the email address or potentially even just had an email address in there that they needed to change, it was misspelled, or if it's not the right address, whatever, you can always go back to this contact section over here on the right. Now, the reason why I'm stressing that it's this section over here on the right is because there's also going to be a bunch of the exact same options that we see here for this particular transaction are going to be options for the entire system over here on the left. So we see here that we've got the wizard up at the top. That brings us to the wizard for this transaction, the dashboard for this transaction. But then I've also got a dashboard over here on the left that brings me back to the home page of Transaction Desk. We've also got a button here for signings, forms, documents, and even contacts. But this is all going to be the basic information for the entire system. So you're actually witnessing, all of the transactions in your system, all of the signings that you've ever done, so on and so forth. So I'm going to head back to my dashboard and then jump back into that transaction that we had just created. So if I needed to actually make a change to the contacts for this transaction, go to contacts, click on their name, and then I can clear out any of the information or change it, excuse me. I'm going to click on the forms for now. So this is the actual next step. So after we've created our transaction, we need to start getting some of these forms filled out because we've already put in details and contacts and added all of our forms and documents. Now we need to start filling things out to get signed. So I'm going to click on our listing agreement first. And you'll notice that when we first get in here, there's going to be a bunch of the details that have been added earlier in our process that are now automatically being added to this form. So we see that the address is already present. We've got our legal description put in there. We've got our exceptionally overpriced price tag added in. We've got our listing effective date, as well as the expiration date. And then there's also going to be a bunch of blank spaces that are going to be specific to this form that were not defined by any of the details or contact information that we had already added. So for instance, here we've got our commission stuff. So I'm going to say that I'm going to take a 10%. Got to sell the property within 1 day. Just add in some extra details on some of those blanks. And we'll scroll down to here. So on this is or is not option, one of the things that we've had to go through and manually do over time is make sure that each of these forms has some logic to it. So in this case, if I check one of these options, notice it even tries to indicate if you're doing this in real life, check one or the other. If I check the other option after one is checked, it's actually going to switch which one is checked. So it's not going to allow you to put in contradictory terms whenever you guys are filling these out. Same thing goes with this one right here. Whenever, there we go. And notice that whenever we put in any numbers on this page, it's going to automatically try and put that into the format that's going to be correct or acceptable. Now, there's also some portions of the forms that will actually have lines on them. So obviously the expectation when you guys are first going through and adding all this information in there is going to be that you have a pen and this paper in front of you that you need to fill out. We've tried to make sure that on the portions that used to just be a series of lines, it's actually been blanked out. But if there is still lines present on those forms and you guys start typing, it'll clear those lines out from underneath. We're going to see that when we get to the blank addendum, but this is another one here. There we go. We're all set. All right. Now we have the individuals' names down here at the very bottom. This is what's going to be appearing on this particular form. But if we do have anywhere that it's referring to the party that's actually selling this property, it won't be referring to the people that are signing. Now, once I've added all the information on this particular form, there's a couple different ways for us to let the system know that we're done with it. Up here at the top, we have a file option. We also have a little save button right here. So if I needed to save the file, I can hit that. It doesn't really do much. All it's doing is just letting me know down at the bottom that it saved this. This is going to happen automatically every couple minutes as well, but I don't know about you guys. I've had a massive amount of data lost over my lifetime. I've had an entire semester's worth of work that I lost one time because a hard drive failed. I am excessively paranoid about losing things, so I'm always going to be that guy that saves compulsively. But you guys shouldn't need to. It does do it every couple minutes, but for those of you who've been around the block for a few times, that's not going to be a particularly good amount of time. You may need to just manually save it because you're finishing these forms too quickly. But once I've saved it, I can move on to another transaction form up here at the top. So if I needed to move from my listing agreement to, let's say, my disclosure of lead-based paint, I can click on that button and then click on disclosure of lead-based paint to start filling that one out. So when we get in here, I can see a couple of these checkboxes that I can fill out. We are working with Transaction Desk to try and get a fillable version of this form that your client will be filling out. But for now, you guys will have to manually add those spaces when you get to the signing. And in the interim, they've got the names down here at the bottom as well. All right, so this one looks like it's ready to go. I'm going to move on to the next form, which is our blank addendum. Now, the blank addendum is going to have some omissions that the rest of them appeared to have automatically. So for instance, we have our property information up at the top. We have a bunch of lines here that as soon as we start typing, it clears out those lines underneath, as I mentioned before. But down here at the very bottom of the page, since these are not tied to any specific individual or role, so like the sale or seller was going to be appearing under the spaces where sellers would have to sign. The listing agent information will be under the listing agent fields on the forms. All of those are going to automatically have that information. But when we get to this blank addendum, it just is asking for us to put that information in by showing us these blue spaces. So I'm going to say Jeremiah Johnson and Joanna Johnson. Perfect. So I've added both of those in there. And when we get to our signing, I'm actually going to be putting in the date stamp, the signature stamp, and all of the other portions that they'll need to fill out. So I'm done with this one. I'm going to go back up to my transaction forms, and we'll talk about that property data form a little bit later in class. Let's say that I'm actually ready to go. These are all ready to be signed. So I'm going to check the check boxes for them, and we can actually start the signing process from within this form. Now, I did want to point out one more step here in case you guys do end up wanting to fill out a form and then just kind of jump back a step. There is a save and exit button. This is effectively just the ripcord. If you guys have filled this information out, you don't have to go back up and actually save it. You can just hit save and exit in order to be able to just jump back to your list and then check the checkboxes from there instead. So effectively just an either or option. You can do it whichever way is going to be more approachable to you. Now, I'm going to check those checkboxes, hit the basket once more. It shows me one last time which of the forms I'm actually going to be sending out. And then it presents me with a bunch of the buttons up here at the top so that I can start the process of actually sending this off to be signed, downloading them, copying them, emailing them, whatever the case may be. So I'm going to click on the sign and authenticate option. And it's going to start me up with the brand new version of Authentisign. Now, for those of you guys who might have been in the class, even just last year, this is a new option that we have. So we're going to be taking a 10-minute break here, and I'm going to actually answer this question real quick before we actually get started with the signing process. If you've done the listing form and add edit, can it now switch to this system without actually needing to redo all of it? Unfortunately, only portions of the information will come over. I'm sorry, Terry. Yeah, that is correct. If you end up adding a listing in the system already, and then you guys try to start a transaction, you can just import the data directly from that listing number. So instead of having to, manually type in all of that information once more, it'll just automatically import that data for you. And again, you guys also have the option to import directly from a tax record as well. So if you don't have a listing number already in hand, whether you guys have added it yourself or using a historical record, you guys can use that transaction or use that tax record to be able to import some data as well so that you don't have to fill out all of the details every single transaction you guys make like we did today. But yeah, that's a good question. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. When we get back, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the signing side of things, and I'll do a quick recap before we get into it. All right. So it's almost 9:54, so I'm going to say I will see you guys back here at 10:04. I'm going to put the video back on the screen, and we'll have the music playing. If you guys hear the music stop, that means we're going to be getting started again. But I will see you guys back here. Also worth mentioning, at 9:04, I'm going to be having you guys raise your hand again. So if you're not here, that may mean that you may not get the CE credit. So just make sure that when you guys get back at 9:04, we're going to be hitting that raise hand option. Oh, not right now. Yeah, I'll see you guys in a bit. So we're going to get started again. And, oop. Oh, and I'm so sorry, Rick, I just saw your hand pop up, but if everyone wouldn't mind, go ahead and hit that raise hand option just to let me know that you guys are back. And Nicole, since you got both of those sessions running, you only have to do it in one. Oh, yeah, you got one raised. All right. Yeah, but just hit that raise hand button, and I just need a document that everybody's here, so leave it raised for now. Thank you. It looks like I have a couple more people that still need to hit that raise hand button. Just as a reminder, this is related to our CE credit. This is kind of one of our ways that we've justified not having to have the video cameras going the entire time. So if we can keep doing it this way, that'd be ideal. Just so that you guys don't have to, feel like you have to get ready just to watch somebody talk at the screen. Let's see, so I need Ann O, Glinda, Rick, I already saw your hand was raised. Susan, if you wouldn't mind, hit that raise hand button one more time. I think you had it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Ann. Glinda, thank you. Yeah, all right, perfect. This is good. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Again, all of this is just to make sure that we don't have to do the video camera thing. But Holly asked a question real quick, and I did actually want to address that. Let me delete this real quick so we can see where we were. So when we first got started in class, we went through, we created a transaction. We added in a bunch of the details through the wizard process. We can jump back to the wizard if we need to at any time. We can also join in from the dashboard, go back and refill in any details that we needed to fill in, check on any of the contacts, add in any forms, and then of course, start any signings. Now, from the forms though, I'm going to be checking the checkbox for any of the forms that I'm going to be sending off to be signed. Notice I am leaving one of these unchecked. And then I'm going to send this off to start a new signing. Now, again, for those of you guys who have been here in one of our classes in the past, you may recognize that the system that we're about to be talking about is completely new. This was something that they introduced at the end of last year, and they gave us a 90-day time limit on being able to access the old version. As of, I think, midway through this month, I want to say, they've officially switched over to only offering the new version of AuthentiSign. Now, in normal circumstances, I'm a relatively skeptical person, or well, I'm a very skeptical person, but I was genuinely impressed with the new system that they've offered. I think that it's way, way easier to use. So when we click on that signing process now, what it's going to start us off with is something that's familiar to those of you guys who were using the old system. We can just see all of the forms put together here so that we can kind of give it a little bit of an overview. But you notice at the moment, it doesn't show any of the signing fields, and it doesn't show any of the spaces for people to start filling information out. All of that's going to be dependent on this very first step. So just like we saw on the previous pages, there's going to be some navigation over here on the right-hand side of the page that's going to allow us to kind of effectively walk through each step to ensure that everything is ready to go before we hit next and initiate the signing process itself. So the first thing that we need to do is actually choose whether or not we want to have a particular signing order. What this means is that if you guys are used to the old system, this is the sign in line option. This means that one person is going to sign, then the next, then the next, then the next, and the signings cannot actually be completed until the person before was done. If you guys still want to use that system, just toggle the switch over. If not, we're going to leave it with the default option. Now, the default option is that all of the participants that we add will receive the email at the exact same time. They can finish their signing at their leisure. And then the only person that's going to be delayed if one person doesn't finish their signing is you. So I'm going to hit add participants, and we're going to do either add yourself. I don't need to sign this one right now. Add new, which means I'm going to be creating a new contact. Just as a heads up, this is not recommended. It's usually best to make sure that all of your contacts are ready to go, which is going to be the add from transaction option. This way we can actually just grab somebody that is a part of the transaction that I've already created. So remember those contacts that we already added into the transaction. In fact, we already have their names down here ready to go. We also have one final option, add from contacts, which again is just going to be from somewhere in the transaction desk system. But I'm going to be doing add from transaction. It pulls up a list of everybody that's currently on that transaction. So I can add in Jeremiah and Joanna. Now, when we check the checkbox for both of those individuals, it also gives us one last option to choose whether they're going to be a signer, somebody who's just going to review this, or if they're going to just get a carbon copy of it after it's been signed. Now, just to clarify the difference between a signer and a reviewer, the signer is actually somebody who needs to put their signature on this particular piece of paper. A reviewer is somebody that's just going to be looking over the document, making sure that everything is copacetic, and then just giving it a yes or no, this is acceptable or not. So if you guys have, let's say, a lawyer who's not going to be putting their signature on this, but still has to go through and make sure that everything has been filled out properly and that their client's needs are being met, you can set them as a reviewer. And if you would like to, you can use that in combination with this set signing order, so that if you had somebody that needed to be set as a reviewer, they're not going to be required to put a signature on it. But if they want to be the first person, they can go through, make sure that everything is correct. Once they approve it, then Jeremiah will be able to sign it. Once Jeremiah signs it, then Joanna will be able to sign it. If I untoggle this set signing order option to just go back to the system default, just sending it to everybody at the same time, etc., then we can just see that they no longer have the numbers here indicating which order they're going to be in. So we can just see that everybody's going to get it at the same time. If you do add someone that needs to be removed, after you've added them, you just click on this arrow and you can take them from the signing. Or you can go in there and make sure that all of the details are correct. So for instance, if you had gotten to this point, you added in the signer and then you realized, oops, looks like I didn't add in their contact information. You can put in their email address here, maybe update it if need be. And then there's also a checkbox to allow us to take the information that we've updated on here and send it back to the contact information for the transaction as a whole. Now, just to clarify, because this is again something that we get a lot of phone calls on the service desk about, whenever you guys are updating the contact information during the signing process, make sure that you check this checkbox to update the transaction contact. This will ensure that whenever you guys go through to start another signing for this particular transaction with that particular individual, you'll have the up-to-date information according to the last time you needed to reach out to them. So again, make an update, make sure that checkbox is checked. I'm going to put in the initials down here, JSJ, go, and save. So we're all set. Jeremiah is ready to go. Joanna's ready to go. So now we can move on to our next step, which is over here on the right, docs. Now the docs is just verifying for us which of the documents and forms that we have available. In this case, all of my forms have been added because that's the screen that I had initially put them in there. But if I need to add something else in there, I have to do this add document or form. When we click on this, it's going to automatically default to the forms that are in this particular transaction. So we can see up here at the top, I've got my listing agreement, my disclosure, and my blank addendum, all of which have checkboxes indicating they are currently here. If I needed to add in that tax record information, I can just click on the add button, and that'll be added to the end of the document or the end of the signing that I have here. If I needed to rearrange that, I can actually click and drag to move these in different positions. Once I drop this, it'll actually put a different number on there. We'll leave that at the end though. So now if I scroll down, I can see that I've got a couple extra forms down here at the bottom. Now, the next option is going to be our tools. Tools is where we get our last opportunity to ensure that whatever the needs are of the client, they can actually interact with this document. So if we need them to sign, if we need them to put their initials, if they need to type something in or check a checkbox, maybe even make multiple choice options or even use a dropdown, all of that information can be added onto this. So I'm going to scroll down here to our blank addendum so we can actually have a little bit of space to play with. So in this case, when I'm adding the information, I'm going to be adding for Jeremiah. I can switch over to Joanna if need be. And then we also now with the new system have an option to do all signers as well. So if I needed to, I can actually do a sign here option, and it'll automatically drop a space for Jeremiah and another space here for Joanna. And then all I have to do is just reposition those in order to have them added to this form. Now I'm going to get rid of these, just hit the little trash can icon, and let's actually start over. So I'm going to go back to Jeremiah. Let's say that we do want to do this manually where I'm going to be adding in his info and then adding in her info. I've got Jeremiah chosen. We'll do sign here. Now notice whenever I drop this, it automatically added in the date. You can see why that's happening by clicking on the, there we go, clicking on the item itself. And you'll see that we have a couple different new choices where we can add in a name block. If I check the name block here, you can see that it adds in a something that we can actually move. So for instance, if I hadn't put in his name, we can actually hit that name block and add it in under there. We can also even add in a timestamp. So if we needed to get exactly when it was that he actually added this in there, we can see all of that added all at once. And again, now the new system will have the option to just select the central item, so the actual part the client is interacting with, in this case indicated by the blue, and I can hit the delete option to get rid of it. Now, not to worry, even though I did check a bunch of checkboxes on there, the next time I try and add a sign here option, it's still only going to be adding in the date. So I'm going to switch over to Joanna, add in her signature, go, and then reposition the date, and I'm all set. Now, if you guys do end up liking the way that that happened with the name underneath there, you can click on the item again. And if you want the name block to appear, you can check that checkbox and then do save as default settings. So what that means is that whenever I save that as my default, the next time I add that sign here option, it's going to automatically put in the name block and the date block. And make the change back, uncheck it, save, and I'm good to go. So there's a little bit more customization than we used to have, but again, relatively simple to use. We also have the option to add in some of those signer fields. So for instance, if we needed to add in a name underneath something, I can just click and drag. I can do the same thing for Jeremiah, click and drag, and I'm good to go. Add in email addresses if need be, add in the date if need be, add in the time if need be. All of that's going to be available to slide on over there. You can also select each item, hit the delete or backspace to get rid of it, or you can click on the item and hit delete over here on the right. Now the extra option, so initials is going to be fairly simple. If I add something on there that I don't want, uncheck it, save as default settings, and so on. We have a text line and a checkbox option as well. So text line in this case is actually going to be Jeremiah has the option to add text into this. This is not for me. This is not something that I'm going to be adding in some more information. This is going to be asking him to put in some extra information there. The checkbox is actually going to be something that you can either set as a required option, or you can uncheck this option and it'll just be a checkbox if they need to acknowledge, yes or no, or whatever the case may be. We also have the initial pages option and initial choice option. Pages is actually really easy. what's going to happen is it's going to add a bunch of uh, initial boxes onto the pages that we need it to. So in this case, I can say I want to have a small initial box. I want it to appear at the right side of the page, at the top of the document. I want to get Jeremiah and Joanna to add their signatures or their initials. And I want that to appear on the tax record information. I also have the option to say whether I want this to add to all 4 pages, or even just choose individual pages to use, which in this case, I'm actually going to add it just to page 2 through 4. There we go. Now, when I've finalized all the options for this initial pages, I hit place initials. And now we can see Jeremiah and Joanna both have options to initial each of these pages added. So instead of having to manually add those to each and every page, you can actually just hit that initial pages and it'll put in everything for you. Now there's also an initial choice. So if you do have 2 different options, and instead of it just being a, either or, where it's this radio choice, which looks like this, if you guys do have the need to get an initial in order to indicate which choice they're choosing, you can do that initial choice and it'll put in 2 different options for you. Move those into their proper position. And you can even do a 3rd option, 4th option, and so on. So wherever they put their signature is going to be the one that it's going to choose. If they try to sign a different option, it'll automatically unsign whichever initial they were initially using. Initially, that was not an intended pun. All right, so clear all of those out. The radio choice is just an either or option. So if you guys do have 2 choices that you need to put in there, you can do that. Perfect example actually would be this lead-based paint. So for instance, if I needed to do checkbox here, checkbox there we go. So he has to choose either or. I can also add in the text line. So if you needed to explain something, and I can make it fill up that entire space if need be. Now, if I wanted to make this something that was required, and I can select the item and then click the required option. All right. Back to our final choice, which is the drop down. This is actually an interesting addition. I know that there's going to be some uses for this. I'm not entirely sure when or how. So if you guys have examples, I'd really like to hear them because I like to communicate that to classes in the future. But what this dropdown is going to allow us to do is effectively, instead of doing a multiple choice where you might have like, this, that, and the other thing, if you need to just choose something and you don't have a lot of space to do multiple choice, you can use this drop-down option. So for instance, if I had some text in there that was, did you want to get the fence fixed or something like that? I can say, yes. Come on. Yes, no, it's being arranged. There we go. So then we can get to the name. And the default option is select. That works. So whenever Jeremiah actually gets to this page, instead of having just, a bunch of different options listed off and then using the multiple choice option, he can use this drop down so that it takes up a significantly smaller amount of space. Now, in my case, I was just giving an example of there being some text above this, but it appears that this is all just blank. So what I'm going to need to do is use the final set of tools, which is all going to be related to you as the agent. That's going to be the markup tools. This is where we can add in an additional text box. So for instance, if I had filled out my forms or documents and needed to add in some additional information, I can do that with this text box. And notice instead of it being like how we had it before, where Jeremiah was going to be adding in text, it was blue or green or whatever the color is of that particular participant. This is actually for me. So it's just going to allow me to say, since be prepared before listing. Perfect. So I can move that around. I can make it larger or smaller. I can even choose whether or not there's going to be a specific alignment, what font, what size, et cetera, et cetera. And then that way it matches the information that I'm going to require Jeremiah to do. If I don't need it to be required, select it, uncheck that checkbox, and I'm good to go. So lots of different options for that. We have a highlight option as well. So if I needed to highlight this section just to ensure that he actually notices the information. Oh, I just realized I spelled listing wrong. We also have a line option. This is going to be a perfectly drawn line, so you guys don't have to worry about like, oh, you know, I accidentally chose the freehand option where it's just all over the place. The line option is going to be best used if you guys have a portion that you need to block out. So I can just click on this, drag, click and drag, click and drag. And you notice I don't have to keep on clicking back to the tool in order to continue marking portions out. And again, all of my lines can be as horizontal as I want them to be. Like so. And then finally, we also have an ellipse tool or ellipse tool. So if you needed to draw a shape in there. I also wanted to point out any of these options that we've added on here, you can select, choose what the color is if you need to. So if I wanted that to be black and I wanted it to be really thick, if I wanted it to be blue instead. Interestingly enough, it used to be that the highlight tool and the ellipse tool were actually going to do a fill. They've recently changed it so that it's actually just going to be an empty circle on the inside there, like so. Anyway, I'm going to get rid of all of this garbage that I just added to my signing. Go. I'll leave all of those. All right, we're all set. So those are the tools that are available for adding into the signing. Again, everything that you guys see up here at the top is going to be color coded to match. So we see Jeremiah's information is all going to be in blue. Joanna's information will always be in green. All right. Now, once we've added all this information on there, I can go to the layouts option. Now, layouts is going to be a function that you guys have access to that some people are going to get a lot of use out of, some people might not ever use. It's really going to depend on what forms you guys happen to be using. Now, if you have a bunch of documents that you use within your office that are specific to your group or specific to the way that you guys do transactions, this layouts option might be very useful. So for instance, if you guys are often using blank addendums, you can use this layout choice to save the way that you guys have arranged this. So like if I wanted to do the fence be repaired, just going to go in here, add that T, that's just going to bug me. Oh, there we go. On the layouts, if I wanted to save this layout that I have, so where it has the seller's name, seller's date, seller's name, seller's date, there's a little drop down here with a little bit of information. I can actually save all of this by clicking the Create Layouts button. All you have to do is just say which of the forms you guys actually want to save as a template. I'll say blank addendum, fence repair. There we go, and create. So this way, the next time I actually go in to use this exact addendum, if I don't have any information on the screen when I get here, I can go to Layouts and then do Apply Layouts. I can go down to the blank addendum here. And then when I click on the blank space over here, I can scroll down and see all of the old layout options that I had created. And then I can see all of the new ones, including, here we go, fence repair. Sign layout signatures. And I'm all set. So it added all that information back in there other than my little questionnaire. Perfect. All right. So the final choice here is going to be the options. Now, coincidentally, some of this information is going to be clarified whenever we click next to actually send the signing off. Oh, Terry, I see your hand up. Actually, you know what, before we move on, because this is going to be the final steps, there should be a prompt on your screen to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. Oh, and actually here, I'll get that prompt there. Oh, yes. Yes, it will. Yeah, I'll be sending you guys a recording after class is over. Yeah, because I know this is a little bit dense. There's a lot of stuff that we're covering really quickly. All right, but yeah, once we've gotten our signers added, made sure that the documents are all added in the right order, we've gone through and added in all the signature blocks and everything else, we can save it as a layout if we need to use this exact layout for future usage. We finally have our options. Oh, and Holly asked, after they sign, do we go in and delete these boxes? Oh, and actually, the signing portion that we're going through right here is actually just the setup for the signing. Any of the boxes that we've added are effectively just going to be used during that signing process, and then they're going to disappear the next time you add in new signing with the exact same forms even. So the only things that should automatically appear are going to be the ones that the system recognizes this form needs. So for instance, these ones that I added to my blank addendum, the next time I try and sign this exact same form, I'm going to actually have to go through and add in all of the signature blocks again, or I can use that layout to reapply all of the boxes there. Yeah, that's a good question. All right, so finally, we have our options. Again, this is something that you don't necessarily have to visit. You'll see that in just a minute here, but it does give us the option to check the signing details. So we can see the name of the signing that we're going to be sending off. Coincidentally, this is actually already available on your screen right up here at the top. So if I wanted to change the way that the name was shown whenever we send out the email, just delete that and I'm good to go. So this is what it'll actually appear as in the subject of the email that I send off. So if I wanted to maybe say listing agreement signing and remove the portion that says OREC, this will make it nice and concise. Their name is present, their address is present, the name of the signing is present. Easy peasy. We also have a section here for expiration dates. Again, it's going to ask us this on the next page, but we do have the choice to just say, all right, look, I want to make sure that you guys have this signed for sure before tomorrow. So I'm going to hit Save Changes. We've also got reminders. If you guys would like to send off reminder emails to make sure that the clients do, in fact, actually get this signed in time, you can do set reminder. Make sure that you guys send every 2 days at, let's say, 10 a.m. Perfect. So save changes. And then finally, we have the Authentisign ID position. So Authentisign will actually add effectively a receipt number to every single document on here. For those of you guys who have been using DocuSign or .loop, or I mean, almost every single other one, effectively what this is doing is saying where that signature block is going to appear that says, this is a legally binding contract, and here's the code that we will provide if a lender doesn't believe that this is legally binding. So I usually just leave it as the default, which is the top left. That's where most digital signing services have their information. Sometimes it's bottom left, but either way, it doesn't necessarily matter. You guys can put that in there wherever you want. But now let's actually hit this next option. So let's say that I jumped in here, I added in my signers, everything was already filled out and ready to go, or I went through and did that process. The final step to get this sent off is going to be next up at the top right. Now, notice I mentioned before that the options choice was effectively redundant. This is where we get the exact same options that we were just looking at under the options field. Now, this already reflects the information that I've changed. So I've already got my date tomorrow. I've already got my reminders set up, and I can even customize the invites as well. Now, the customize invites option is handy if you guys do have that sign in line option. So for instance, if I was going to be sending this off and Jeremiah needed to sign it before Joanna could even see it, I might want to mention that in my email subject. Say something like, please sign immediately. And then give them a message We can even save messages. So if you guys had some blurbs that you guys wanted to put in on every email that you send off for signings, you can save that, and then you can even import it over. So the exact same way that we did with the layouts option. But I'm gonna say Joanna until you do. There we go. So there will be a custom subject, and there will also be a custom message within there. Now I'm going to leave Joanna's on the just default options so that we can see her information and save. So now when I hit the send option, this is going to be sending those emails out, and it brings me back to my transaction desk interface where I can finally see a signing has been initiated. Now let's run through how to get back to this in the future. So again, this is all within our system. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like on the recipient's end in just a moment here. But if I get back in here later in the day, maybe I went out and did a showing or something like that, and finally back in transaction desk, and I want to find out what happened with the Johnson signing, on the initial sign-in or on the initial page for transaction desk, referred to as the agent dashboard or this little odometer icon here, we can see the create transaction option where we initiated the transaction. We can see the most recent transactions we've modified, including that Johnson one. And then same thing goes over here. The Authentisign system is going to show all of the transactions signings, including the one that I just sent off. So I can see that it's currently sent. If I want to learn more about the transaction, click on the transaction name, and I can also click on the signing itself to see where it is in the process. So it looks like Jeremiah nor Joanna has actually authenticated nor approved this particular signing yet. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like from the recipient's end. So I'm going to start up a new window here. And let's see what that looks like. All right. Perfect. So at the moment, since we didn't actually require for it to send in an actual signing order, we see that both of these arrived at the same time. I did still have the custom subject for Jeremiah, but if I didn't, and these were actually just two independent signers, you'll notice that these actually have effectively the exact same name and contact information, etc. So I'm going to click on the first one here, and it says, "Hello, Jeremiah Johnson, start signing." So very simple, very to the point. So just like our Zoom invites, we just tried to make sure that this was going to be very direct. Make sure that they know who it is that's going to be doing the signing. They click the start signing option. And the first thing that it's going to ask them to do is to accept the terms and conditions of how to do the signing process. And when they hit start over here on the right, they get to the first space for them to start signing. And that's when it's going to clarify for them how they would like to sign. So it used to be that whenever people were initiating the signing process, the first thing that it would ask for is this information. Now it's just a little bit rearranged so that they actually can kind of review the document first. So rather than being obnoxious and being like, well, how are you going to sign it? It's just giving you the choice to kind of zoom through here, make sure that everything is copacetic first, and then they can initiate the signing process itself. Now, you do have a bunch of pre-formatted signature things. So if you guys wanted to just have, something casual, or if they actually wanted to draw in their information, they can do that. I'm not going to bother trying. And then we also have an upload option, which I don't know why anybody would have a digital version of their signature. That seems like a real huge security risk to me, but whatever. It's optional if they need it. I'm going to just use this style. I'm going to just use this Rage Italic. And it also has a choice to remember my signature for future signings. So the next time you send them something to this exact same email address as Jeremiah Johnson, it'll remember his information for that. So I can hit set signature, check either or on here. I can add in some text if I need to. It's really bad in there. Okay. I can hit next over here, or I can just scroll down and click on the next space. I've got my drop down here. Remember, we had the multiple choice option or the drop down. I'm going to say it's being arranged. Perfect. And I can hit next, click it, click, 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 and I'm done. Now, when we hit this complete signing option, what this is actually indicating to us is that this is going to be sent off back to the agent that had initially requested that. In fact, it even provides the information for that person. So that if they want to get in contact with you and let you know that they're done, they can do so. But the important thing that they need to remember is going to be all up here. So we have the signing ID. Remember, this is going to be the receipt number that actually appears up at the top left of the form. And we also have the exact date that this was completed. They can either print the forms that they just signed or even download that. But we'll be able to send that information off to them again in the future if need be. Now I'm going to head back. Let's go into Joanna's information. And if we had the signing order turned on, what'll end up happening is that after Jeremiah has completed the signing, that's when we're going to be able to get the option to have Joanna send the information. So I can do start signing. There we go. It's going to have her acknowledge the legal agreement, start. I think I hit next. Yeah, it doesn't actually interact with it. It's just moving you to the next field. You do actually have to either hit the field or you can actually hit the space bar. Now, the space bar is kind of the limited mobility option. The example I always give is just that my mom, for instance, has arthritis. It's bad enough that, sometimes doing tasks on the computer can be a little bit cumbersome for her. So instead of having to move the cursor around and click on things and potentially hurt her wrist a little bit, what she can do is actually just hit the space bar and it'll go through and do all the signing for her. So instead of having to, do this physically with a pen and paper and move from page to page, or having to click, from section to section or scrolling and whatever, just hit next, hit the space bar, and it'll go through the entire process. So you have that option in case you guys ever need to make it a little bit more accessible to people who have, limited mobility or whatever. All right. So once she's done, click the finish button, complete signing, or she can hit that X and review all the documents again. Maybe she's the one that actually reads everything and Jeremiah just signs everything. She can go back, review everything, and be good to go. So hit finish, complete signing, and she gets the exact same page as what Jeremiah got, including the exact same receipt number. So it's notable that the signing ID in this case is actually going to be the exact same thing. Each and every signing that you guys create will have its own signing ID. That's not going to be an independent signing ID for each person. It's the signing itself that might be questioned. So the people that participated in it, their individual responses aren't necessarily what's going to be questioned. It's whether or not they legally signed this. So that's why they put the signing ID on everything, and we'll see where we can find that again later. Now, it's notable that both of these individuals have now signed. So when I go back in a couple minutes here, we're actually going to see that each of those individuals will receive their own email confirming that the signing has been completed and offering them the option to download and view any of the forms or documents, both as a complete collection. Oh, here we go. As a complete collection where they can get all of them at once, or even just get the signing certificate, so that if there's a lender that doesn't believe that they legally signed this, even though it's a digital signing that's legally binding, they can have all of that information ready to go with a signing certificate validating it. The reason I keep on mentioning that, occasionally some people might question the authenticity of it is that we used to have an issue with this where sometimes lenders would actually not accept digitally signed documents. I'm assuming that after everything that happened with the pandemic, especially in 2020, most people were actually a lot more willing to accept those digital signatures since that was effectively the only way some people were even signing things at the time. So we shouldn't have to worry about that as much anymore. But again, we have that certificate for them. We also have that for ourselves as the agent back in transaction desk. But they can download each of the individual documents and each of the individual documents certificates as well. So makes it nice and easy. The last thing that I wanted to mention about the signing process is that when we go back to transaction desk, I'm going to click into my transaction, click over on here to the signings for this particular transaction. So again, I'm signed into this transaction, click on the signing. I can now see that it's been completed. And I can even see that both of those participants have actually completed it by holding my cursor over it, or I can click on the name of the signing and we can see all the information in here. Oh, and actually, Holly mentioned what would happen if one made a correction. So there's a couple different options whenever you guys initiate a signing that we need to just cover real quick. And that's actually one of them. So I appreciate you asking that. So I'm going to just initiate the signing process on this disclosure of lead-based paint. We're going to jump right back into it. And just to clarify, some of the options that we were discussing earlier are things that you might never need to use. So I'm going to grab this document. We're going to add in our participants from transaction, check, check, select, and that might be it. I might not need to add in any additional options. I can just go straight to next and send that off. But one of the things that I wanted to address is, in this case, both of these people are at the exact same email address. That could be a potential problem depending on, how what their relationship is. I'm going to go over here to Jeremiah Johnson, and I'm going to add in a signing pin. So for instance, if we do have two different people at the same email address, or if you guys just want that extra layer of security just anyway, you can add in a pin and deliver that to someone so that that way they can actually see, all right, I've got a pin of my own. Whenever this comes into our email address, I don't have to worry about Joanna accidentally signing as me. Now the pins can only be 5 digits long, just as a heads up. Additionally, if somebody does end up deciding that they needed to make a correction to this, what that looks like is, oops. When they initiate the signing, there's going to be some options up here at the top. Excuse me, over on the right. I forgot it's moved for the new system, where they can change the signature, and that's about it. No corrections can be offered directly with this. So it used to be that there was some extra options in here, but they've stripped that out just a little bit. So the only thing that they can actually do at this point is hit this reject option. So if there is something that they needed to make a change to, they can indicate that to you. So for instance, let's say other, we'll just go with other. There we go, confirm. And then back in my transaction desk, it's going to let me know that that process has actually been rejected, so that we can see that in real time. If there is something that they need to make a correction on, they can offer that information in either one of those preformed sections, or they can hit that other option and clarify what it was. So to see that, I can actually click back in here. And why is it not showing? Well, it's supposed to show it if you hold your cursor over that. Oh, there it goes. I apologize. It's actually at the top of this. Reason that they rejected it is actually immediately next to where it says participant rejected. The reason is the seller's portion is not fillable. Now, if they had chosen one of the preformed options, that'll appear there instead. The other just gives us the option to type it in. That's the only way that they can offer a correction at this point. The old system had a couple extra options, but just to be perfectly honest, I don't think anybody was using those choices. So they just stripped them out of the system just to keep things a little bit more simplistic in case anybody needs to kind of focus in on things. All right. But that's it for our signing process. Now let's actually talk about the forms and documents after they've been completed and signed. Now, all of the forms and documents that have been signed will actually now appear under this Documents section. Now, when you go to the documents under normal circumstances, you're going to see any of the appraiser reports, the property condition disclosures you scanned, whatever the case may be. Those will all just appear without any folders or anything like that by default. Now, we do have the option to add in a new folder. So if you guys have like a hierarchy of how you guys want the documents to be sorted, you guys can establish that if you need to. But the new system for signings actually will take all of the documents, forms, anything that you guys had sent off to be signed and put it into a folder that in this case is actually named the exact same thing that we named our signing. So it makes it very explicit which collection we're actually going to be working with. So in this case, if I click on listing agreement, I can see all of the forms that I sent off. So here's that tax form, here's a certificate for it, here's a bunch of certificate for each of the other forms. And then down here at the bottom, we have our listing agreement, disclosure of lead-based paint, and blank addendum. It's notable that when we were looking at these on the forms, there was no little green padlock icon. This is indicating that this particular version of this document is actually the certified and digitally signed version. So if I go into this disclosure of lead-based paint, I can see the checkbox that he put, we can see the text that he added, and we can see all of the lines that I've marked out and those signatures that they put on there. So this is the official version of this. It's also worth mentioning the AuthentiSign ID up here at the top left, and that's the receipt number effectively of this signing that got added to the top of every single document that was signed, or every single form or document that was signed. And Terry asked, if the signers are at 2 email addresses and they sign and send back, does it go back as one document to the sender? One document to the sender. I'm not entirely certain I'm following, but just to clarify, whenever they receive the collection, so like when we initially received all of the forms as the signer, they actually had the option to either get everything all at once, or they can actually individually download each of the documents. So they get their own email. So in our case, this is just kind of a bad example for what you're asking about. Everybody got them in one email, but 2 emails because they're at the same email address. If they're at 2 email addresses, they'll be getting one for the signing and then one for after the signing is completed, showing all of the documents, everything signed, everything together, ready to go. So I'm hoping that's answering your question, but if you need to clarify further, just let me know. All right, so now we're going to move away from the transaction side of things. Now that I've completed my signing, I just have to wait for some further details. Let's move on now to the forms, and let's talk briefly about the property data form. Now, I added this when we were initially going through the process of putting in the forms onto this transaction. I'm going to click on the property data form, and you'll notice that even before I do anything else in here, my property data form is already going to have some of the basic details from this transaction filled in for me. So it already put in my name, my license number, my office name. It's already got our house number put in, the county, city, state, et cetera, et cetera. Any of the other details that it could pull, it'll add on here. Now you may need to redistribute some of the details. So for instance, street direction needs to be put over here. We put street type, which is avenue. We put street direction, east. And then that way I can actually strip that out of this portion here. Add in my subdivision. Add in my tax parcel number. Township range and section is only going to allow you to do the portion that you can. So it's not going to let you add in stuff that's not going to be acceptable by the time it saves it, I should say. A little further down, it's already got the legal description imported. We've got our list price, list date, expiration date for some reason didn't import. I'm going to have them correct that. But once you've added in the details on the property data form, if you have add edit, you'll actually have the ability to do this upload listing button. Now the upload listing button, what that'll provide you with is an incomplete listing back in Matrix. So rather than having to go through, and since I've already filled out all the information on Transaction Desk, it's going to add all that information back into an incomplete listing. So when I go to Matrix, I can effectively just pick up where I left off and fill in the remainder of the details. So I can see under residential, my property info, I've already got a whole bunch of the information already saved and ready to use. So easy peasy. Finally, let's actually now talk about the templates. So down here at the bottom left, so if I click on this little navigation menu, I can see that it's labeled settings, or I can hold my cursor over it and it'll say settings. We can find our preferences, which is going to be just kind of basic details about yourself, your signature, branding, if you guys wanted to add in a logo, whatever. But we also have under the settings, the transaction templates. So it's about halfway down the list. This is where we can start up a template either from scratch, which I just do add, give it a name, add a description if I want to. I can even set the type for this transaction template in advance so that it automatically uses that. Or we can even take some of the ones that are either already present in the system that you've created and create a copy, or if there's one that your office has created, you can click on the menu button and copy that one instead. Now, for instance, if I've already created something, I can go over here and actually create a duplicate of that exact same transaction template and then add in additional forms so that if you guys want to do effectively an all-in-one, if you guys want to do an all-in-one template, you can create the all-in-one and then copy that, whittle it down to maybe just the specific transaction type. The example I always use is just the auction. So if you had a residential listing packet and then I wanted to make a copy of this, and it's going to be auction only. There we go. I can create, and that'll actually take all of the forms and documents that I have added here and just add a new one. Now, whether you guys are editing one that already existed or adding one from scratch, the process is fairly simple. It's going to bring you to a page where it shows you one last time what the name is. You can choose what the type is if you guys want to have that built into the transaction template. You can give it a description. It's only going to show that description when you guys are in the template section. So adding in a bunch of information in here is kind of not necessary. But further down, we have checklists that we can add in advance. The checklists are a little bit complex. This is a little bit more highbrow section of the system. This was meant to emulate some of the options that were available in dot loop. So it's, for all intents and purposes, kind of in a beta state. But the checklist can be very helpful for those of you guys who kind of need to keep on track. That's me. So I like the checklist option. We also have the option to add in any contacts. I did want to at least point one thing out with the contact section. We have noticed in the past that people will create a transaction template and then add in some buyer or seller that they're working with that was specifically for this template, like the initial reason why you were creating it. And then they go back to use this template in the future and they have to keep on removing that contact over and over whenever they use the template. So when you're adding in a contact, make sure it's somebody that actually needs to be a part of every time you guys use this particular template. So if you guys are an admin and you need to always add your listing agent on there, you can put that in there. So you could even create a template for each and every individual if you wanted. We also have the documents and folder. You can go through and add in a whole hierarchy of folders. So like if you wanted to put in a folder in advance for the appraisals, If you wanted to add in any company documents, you can do that all on this template. And then finally, the most important part, and the part that's actually going to save you guys a bunch of time, is adding in the forms. It's the same process that we did whenever we were adding them to the transaction. So I just go to add forms, check the checkboxes for each of the forms that I want to use. I can search for them. I can open up the folders. Whichever way you guys add them on there, all of these will be added whenever you create a transaction with this particular template. So update that, head back to my dashboard, and we'll create a quick transaction with that. Just going to say template test. There we go. Choose my template, and actually watch what happens to the type and the add me as the. So I'm going to do auction only, so the one that I was just working with. It took away the type because it's automatically going to create a residential listing. And it also added me as the listing agent because I had chosen that residential listing, I should say. So there's the type. And if I go to step 4, I can see I've already got all my forms added. So that's kind of the note that I wanted to leave you guys on, is just using that transaction templates. Just as a reminder, whenever you guys are looking at listings in Matrix, there's also going to be a little button underneath the photo when you're looking at a listing, or when you're looking at the results, there's a little icon here. Either of those buttons is going to provide you a quick and easy option to just start a transaction with that listing. So rather than having to open up Transaction Desk, paste in the listing number, you can literally just click a button and it's going to start you with all the information that you would need in order to be able to create a transaction for that property. So, easy peasy. We're all set. It is 11:01. We are done with class. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm going to leave the session open for a little while so that if you do have a question you'd like to ask immediately, you can do so. Otherwise, I'm going to be sending a link out to the recording for today's class a little bit later in the day, and we'll send off the attendance report once that report is finalized. So hopefully everything should be quick and painless. If you guys do end up having any trouble with seeing the elective CE credit from today's course, you can always get in contact with OREC, but we're going to try and send that off as quickly as possible since tomorrow's the last day of the month. But thank you guys again. I know I typically don't ask for this, but since we are going through a lot of changes right now, we're actually in the process of trying to hire another trainer so we can start doing in-person outreach classes again. If there are any suggestions or any feedback that you guys might have about any of the classes that we currently offer, or might want to suggest a class for us to offer as well, let us know. You can always reach out to us at the same email address that we use for the service desk in case you guys have any suggestions or feedback on the courses. But we appreciate you guys joining us. I'm going to go ahead and start answering some questions. Let's see, and Signal Chow, I see your hand is up. I'm going to hit that allow to talk. Should have a prompt if you'd like to ask your question. Or maybe you were just waving, but it's okay. That's the problem with the raise hand option, is that it's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? All right, I'm going to leave it open for just another minute here. If we don't end up having any questions, I'll go ahead and close out the session. But for those of you guys who are here just for the initial CE credit, as long as you guys were here at the beginning of class and stuck around and participated where we needed it, you should be eligible for that CE credit. Oh, excellent. Just making sure. Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for joining. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Again, if you do end up having any questions, problems whatsoever, just give us a call at the service desk and we can help you. Have a good one, folks. Stay safe.